Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are talking about the Billy Meier case this evening. Billy Edward Albert Meier is an 80-year-old man who lives in the canton of Zurich in Switzerland. He's about 45 minutes east of Zurich. By automobile, he lives in a tiny mountain village called Hinterschmid-Rüti, which is nestled amongst a pine forest. He is extremely prolific in terms of being an author. He's written over 40 books, over 2,000 contact reports, and literally hundreds of bulletins and other documents. His writings are probably the greatest source of wisdom on the planet. And they're part of what I call the second stage of disclosure, or the enlightenment of humanity. And the first stage of disclosure has already taken place, in my humble opinion, although we haven't had any kind of official recognition from the governments of the world. But we've had insiders like Sergeant Clifford Stone from the Air Force, who worked as kind of a liaison or an interface with extraterrestrial groups that had landed or crashed. He had the ability to do telepathy, and he had contacts in that way with these people. It was very emotional for him, very emotional experience for him, because he felt the emotions of these people who sometimes were in danger being here on the earth. The second other person, the insider, that I think of is Sergeant Robert O'Dean, who worked in the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE headquarters, I believe in the 60s, where he saw a top-secret document that described 6 races of extraterrestrials engaging the people of the Earth, 2 of which looked exactly like us. Robert Dean was also given a top-secret book on everything to do with what the governments of the world at that time knew about our visitors. We also have the book called The Day After Roswell by Colonel Philip Corso, which talks about the Roswell crash and the back engineering that went on. Probably more important than that by far is the work of Colonel Wendell Stevens, who wrote several books on the Meier case, headed up the investigation of the Meier case. There was a private investigations team that went over to Switzerland in the 70s to talk to Billy, to do lie detector tests, to talk to other eyewitnesses, to analyze the photographs and the sound recordings. The metal samples were given to Marcel Vogel, an IBM scientist, to study. All of these investigations proved the Meier case authentic. So we have a really interesting scenario here where we've had multiple insiders come forward from all different walks of the government and different walks of life. So now we begin what I call the second stage of disclosure, or the enlightenment of humanity, which involves us learning how to live our life in such a way that We'll be in harmony with nature and harmony with each other, and living life according to certain creational natural laws which are discussed in Billy's writings. And in front of me I have 3 of his books: The Way to Live, Die Art zu Leben, Might of the Thoughts, Macht der Gedanken, and The Psyche. And these books are written originally, of course, by Billy in German, and then they're translated. So on the left page you get the German, on the right page you get the English. One of the most important creational natural laws that the Meier case talks about is the law of striving. And one of the reasons I think we have so much unhappiness in the world today, because people are living for entertainment, for stimulation, and they don't realize that the only way to really enjoy yourself is to strive, to work at something. So that doesn't mean we work all the time, but certainly a lot of the times. And when you're striving, when you're working, it doesn't mean just work involved in making a lot of money or what your day job is, but you'll find that as you strive more and more at your hobbies, they tend to generate a little bit of money too. Let me read from page 104 of The Way to Live. It says, striving requires an expenditure of effort and must be achieved through hard work. That striving is not simply dropped into one's lap, and that again and again there are circumstances which work against the striving. Therefore, one's striving cannot be constantly and really gratified, because there are multifarious powers which work against the striving. However, this is not abnormal. Rather, it is truthfully in accord with the natural laws. Because where there is no resistance, there is no effort for the progress. Therefore, it has to be in accord with natural law that an opposite pole is positioned against the striving, based on the teaching of the creational law that there must always be 2 poles, a plus and a minus, a pro and a con, a negative and a positive, and together with the 2 poles always produce one, a oneness in equalizedness. So when we lose control, when we go into the state of Ausartung, described by the German writings of Billy Meier, that is because we've focused on either the positive or on the negative. And if we're angry about the negativity of a situation, we're focused on the negative, and then we lose control of the human nature. Striving is one of the creational natural laws talked about in the Meier case. It's the key to understanding happiness. You won't be happy unless you're striving. Striving is the force that keeps us moving forward. And with any striving, there are negative influences and machinations of an evil form which are inseparably one with each other, as are fire and heat. Put another way, this also means that no success can be attained without negative aspects being involved, which tag along during the development towards success. Therefore, errors must inevitably be made so that they can be recognized and resolved, whereby only then can an error-free success finally crystallize, without adverse circumstances and side effects, as well as secondary influences and so forth. There is therefore no productive and evolutive striving unless there are these forces that are going against it. Now, striving is the diligent impulse of the evolution of creation's drive, right up to the highest possible and relatively absolute fulfillment. Striving is life right up to the absolutely fully developed being, which also finds no end in the death, because out of it a new life constantly comes forth. The Meier information presents the case that there is no God as the religions have taught us. There isn't a being up there who is immutable, who is perfect, who is not evolving. In fact, the term God is really a title that refers to human beings who in the past had great consciousness-related powers. The Meier case describes a universal consciousness, a universal intelligence that's really neutral. It's neither good nor evil. It creates universes as a part of its own evolution. And it really has no personality. But here's something that I think is probably challenging for people to wrap their minds around. Even though the creation has no personality, it radiates love. And love is the highest principle in all creation. And through it, everything exists in absolute logic. Nothing exists, nothing at all would exist without the love of creation. The infinite love of creation connects all life, because in all life that love lies hidden. Every tiny plant and every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love, and the creation radiates love. The incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. Billy talked about sensing the love of creation when he was a very young boy. He talked about the lights with which the stars emitted, but he talked about an invisible light called the love of creation. And there's a beautiful passage in the Goblet of Truth entitled, "What the Truth Knows to Say," that says rivers, stones, plants, animals, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms are on a journey through time which involve many, many lifetimes. And death is just the passage into the realm of pure spirit. And many of these creatures are aware of each other, and they're connected by psychic vibrations or swinging waves. And if you study nature and you go out into the forest and you listen to the cicadas and the birds and the crickets and the frogs and watch the birds move as a flock, turn on a dime, instantly, all together, you can logically come to the conclusion that all of nature is connected. And these swinging waves are part of the interconnection of nature. And that's one of the lessons that we have to learn here on the earth in the second stage of this disclosure, is that everything in the universe is one, and it's all bound together. And that's one of the reasons that love is the highest principle. We're not talking about a romantic love. We're talking about an effective love that's based on reverence. And if you develop the reverence for nature, if you start to be able to sense the power behind the beauty of nature, then there's a spiritual process that starts in the spiritual consciousness called empfinden, which is a fine sensitive feeling which starts to recognize this radiating love. And again, love is the highest principle in all creation. Love and wisdom go together. And the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. And that's one of the things that Semyase told Billy back in 1975 when they first met. Billy's third contact was a woman from the Pleiades star system who would contact Billy telepathically in the middle 1970s, and he would ride his moped out to specific locations. She would land her beam ship in a field, and step out during the day, and the two would sit down underneath a tree nearby, and they would have a discussion. And one of the early contacts with Semyase she talked about this, what she called the wonder of all wonders, which is the human spirit. She said it was the bearer of the creative realm, that it records everything that we all of our impulses, all of our emotions, all of our thoughts, our speech. It will tell us if our thinking is right or wrong. She called it the wonder of all wonders. The spirit form is your spiritual consciousness. And it's the part of you that survives death. It's the part of you that will reincarnate. And you have a spiritual lineage. You have a series of previous personalities that stretch back for at least about 4 million years if you're a typical Earth human, and even longer if you are one of those people who came here on a ship 100,000 years or longer ago and were part of some of these ancient societies that existed on the Earth, societies that built our pyramids 70-some thousand years ago, and again 36,000 years ago. Let me talk a little bit more about the principles of the Spirit described in the book, The Way to Live. Page 400 says, many humans believe that the human being only lives once in order to then become eternally silent and disappear. It is not thereby considered that the human being has a very weighty task to, in a dutiful form, because he or she is namely determined for evolution, which is characterized by striving in order to climb by means of the attained knowledge, the wisdom and love, as well as the peace, the joy, and harmony, toward a relative absolute fulfillment which enters the all-embracing creation, the universal consciousness as knowledge and wisdom, whereby the creation also continues to evolve. For the spirit form, the state of the death is a state of further life in another dimension of the other world, where the duration of the stay for the processing of all the facts collected in the material life is used for the further evolution. Consequently, therefore, in the realm of the other world, the spirit form does not simply live through a fallow time without sense and benefit. Rather, there occurs a learning-based and evolution-based activity until that time when a return into a material body becomes urgent, and the next rebirth brings a new life and becoming, which after a certain time, however, is also integrated again into the passing, from which then, in turn, a new becoming and passing arise, and indeed in an endless series, right up to the point in time, and the last incarnation, after which there no longer comes about any rebirth into a material body. Rather, a rebirth, and this is the fifth stage of evolution, a rebirth as a quivering, transparent spirit form through which one can put one's hand through, in a level which is called the High Council. After that, the next change occurs after long ages, and indeed into the first pure spirit level, which as the Arahatathvasata level, as the lowest step of the pure spirit levels, takes up the spirit form which is now pure. So the number 7 comes quite often in the universe. There are 7 dimensions in the material universe. The Plejaren live in another dimension, different than ours, where there are more people on worlds, and these worlds are closer together. There are 7 stages of evolution that humans in our universe go through. They start out as primitive, they go into rational life, where we are, although we're not always rational. In fact, we don't control our thoughts the way we should, but we have the ability for rational thought in the 2nd stage of evolution. The 3rd stage is intelligent life, and there are some people on the earth moving into intelligent life. The 4th stage is called real life. Amazing things happen in this stage. We learn the secrets of the universe. We learn to travel from star to star with almost no time passing. We also learn the ability of fantastic levels of genetic engineering. Semyase's ship had a biological central computer, which was self-aware, sentient, which was created by the Plejaren themselves. Semyase could communicate with it telepathically. It was alive in every sense of the word. So her ship essentially was a living being with a metallic hull. This is where truth is beyond fantasy. These people are so advanced, it is disturbing, and it would be disturbing for people to learn these things that aren't ready for them. The 2nd stage of our disclosure requires that we respect the people that are less evolved than us. I often draw the analogy of people living in rural Kentucky or West Virginia. They're not ready for this, most of them. Some may be, but most are living in a different level. So the people that will be studying the Meier material are kind of the tip of the spear as we move forward through this very, very difficult time. Svath, Billy's first contact, told him that in the 3rd millennium, the people of the earth will become indolent, they will become obtuse, it will be hard for them to understand what is going on, they'll be too lazy to really put forth the effort to help themselves. And that's one of the problems now, is that people lack the sense of responsibility needed. Really, much of the teaching of the Spirit is learning to be responsible and learning to strive. One step towards responsibility is striving, working towards the goal. So confusion and maliciousness is going to run over the earth, and the people with this information are going to be able to help those which have no answers. We're lucky enough to have the answers. We're lucky enough to understand these creational natural laws like reincarnation. Now, we were talking about the spirit form. The spirit form you could think of as a fragment of the universal consciousness. It comes into the body of the child at 21 days. It brings with it the consciousness, the unconsciousness, the subconsciousness, and the new personality. Now, what's programmed into the subconsciousness is the essences of the evolutive forms from the previous lifetime. These are programmed into the subconscious of the new material consciousness when it comes in. This happens in the spirit realm in the time between lifetimes. In the overall consciousness block, your previous lives are processed, and your love, your sense of fairness, your sense of wisdom, your sense of responsibility, all these things are distilled down into your, what they call your evolutive forms. The essence of your wisdom, the essence of your self-control. It's the level of evolvement that you were at in your previous life. That is programmed into your subconsciousness. So this information, your subconsciousness then will impulse you so that you get these hunches, so that you learn, you get to learn what your next step is. You start to understand what your goals should be. You get oriented. One of the ways we get oriented is by learning to control our thoughts. And the human beings who do not overcome their weaknesses and do not free themselves from the contents of all their negative and destructive thoughts will remain weak, wretched, and miserable. In order to be successful, human beings must renounce selfishness, which as a rule degenerates into immoderateness. Selfishness and immoderateness must be dissolved and eliminated in order to discover and develop one's latent resources. One of the things I've learned to ask myself is, or tell myself, I think it's better to phrase it that way, I am confident, I am optimistic, I'm relaxed, and I'm cheerful. I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, and I'm cheerful. I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful. The fact is that the creational natural laws and recommendations give their help to the righteous, to the rightness, to those who are magnanimous, virtuous, studious, honest, and fair. So, if you can think the right way, you kind of even get help from the creation. I don't know all the mechanics of that. That definitely is something to focus in on the future. Real optimism fulfills an extraordinarily important function in the human being's life. And man, I know sometimes that is tough. I'm learning here too, folks. Don't get me wrong. This better half is the innermost nature of the spirit, that is to say, the spirit form. Optimism is hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of something. Synonyms include confidence, hopefulness, cheerfulness. Interesting. I never thought of those as synonyms. Optimism is a mental attitude, a worldview. Optimism seems to have an effect on our health. Think about that. A meta-analysis has confirmed the assumption that optimism is related to psychological well-being. Put simply, optimists emerge from difficult circumstances with less distress than do pessimists. Furthermore, the correlation appears to be attributable to coping style. That is, optimists seem intent on facing problems head-on, taking active and constructive steps to solve their problems. Pessimists are more likely to abandon their effort to attain their goals. And this is let me continue a little bit more about optimism. Optimism is a challenge. You get no argument from me on that. Optimistic behavior enables the human being to see and acknowledge the clear truth, and even in the rottenest situation. Thus, an optimist is not a clown or a comical figure. He or she is a human being under the greatest pressure who remains consciously hopeful and happy, and who, in defiance of all pressure, remains consciously hopeful and happy, and who, in defiance of all blows, breakdowns, and deplorable states of affair and so forth, always retains the upper hand in the sense and the conviction for that which is good and that which is best. You know, I was talking about the first stage of disclosure before, and it just came in my mind that I left out maybe my most important guy, the one I like to talk about, Dr. Herman Oberth, who said that the people of Germany could not take credit for their technological achievements alone, that they had been helped by people of other worlds. Dr. Hermann Ober said that in the 1970s in a public meeting. He was the mentor of Werner von Braun, and I bet in many ways he was optimistic. I think people naturally do these things sometimes, and it's just part of their personality or their upbringing, and they become successful. They become very successful without necessarily knowing these principles outright. Which is quite interesting. Oh, I wanted to quickly read this section in The Might of Thoughts that kind of, I guess, was the section I copied in for the show tonight. Negative and positive are two powers which belong together and always work together and never allow themselves to be separated because one is dependent on the other. However, if the human being nevertheless has the audacity to separate these two factors, then an Ausartung inevitably results on one side or the other. As a consequence of this, positive or negative Ausartungen then arise, exactly according to which factor the human being turns toward, negative or the positive. So never get carried away either in negative way, because if you're looking at something and you become totally angry or whatever, and you're just focused on the negative, you're not looking for the positive. So we gotta always start to look for the positive, even in a negative situation. So suppose that if we start to think that there is only negative in a given set of circumstances, we tend to get badly out of control. The same is probably true in which we think there is only a positive in a certain set of circumstances. Then we can get badly out of control. For example, when people become strongly under the influence of romantic affective love. If the human being does not use both powers and only turns toward one of the two factors, then in this he or she falls badly out of control of the good human nature. And that is why neutral positive equalized thinking means that both the negative as well as the positive must be included in the thought patterns and must be tended and nurtured, however, in equalized, kind, and wise, just as the term expresses it. So, start to think about looking for the positive, even in negative circumstances. And in a very positive set of circumstances, also look for a potential negative to see things in a balanced way. Hi, Faith333. I wanted to say hello there. He's got a question from the chat room. I do not know why you cannot download the shows. That's very odd. I hope no one else is having that trouble. In the upper right-hand corner, there's usually a little button, a download button, where you can download the shows. There's so much happens with Blog Talk. It's really hard to follow all the time what's going on there. They change things. They change things quite too often. You know, the Pleiaren left the Earth in 1995. And that's when they revealed their true identity. The Pleiaren do not live in the Pleiades. There are no Pleiadians, sorry to say. They live some 80 light years beyond our Pleiades, which is like 400 light years away. And you have to go through like a dimensional gate. And they live in a different space-time configuration. There are 7 dimensions, 7 space-time configurations in our material universe. And there are galaxies and planets and solar systems in all these 7 dimensions. There's no reality in all these dimensions is very similar. There are variations, though, because in the Pleiades dimension, a lot shorter distance between planets with human beings and civilizations on them. Now, between 1975 and 1986, there were at least 3 extraterrestrial bases on the Earth in Asia, North America, and Switzerland. The base in Switzerland had been on the Earth for more than 300 years, and there were 2,862 extraterrestrial humans from 12 different races during this 11-year period. And the extraterrestrials came from the Lyra, Vega, Pleiades systems, and from neighboring stars. And if you look at And Still They Fly, I believe that's the Guido Musburger book. On page 244, he talks about that. There was also a base within Mount Shasta. And the people who live there were called the Hyperboreans. I think they've left already. Mount Shasta is in Northern California, and at one time there was a small city located in this mountain in Northern California. There were 700 people there, and they were the leftover descendants of a group of extraterrestrial humans that lived on the Earth in the ancient past, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And you could see their golden-colored spacecraft come out of the side of Mount Shasta. You get pictures of those. I have pictures on my website. The Hyperboreans would get visits from other extraterrestrials too. Sometimes they would go down into local villages, and they had to carry beam weapons if they were ever attacked or accosted or disturbed by Earth humans. They would use these weapons to kind of cause people to be unable to move, let's put it that way. 2 smaller groups of these Hyperboreans were living unrecognized and deep underground near the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Again, the Hyperboreans had been here for about 180,000 to 190,000 years. They seem in some way to be related to the current white human race. The Hyperboreans had a very advanced king of wisdom called an Ishwish, who gave the prophet Enoch his great wisdom. According to the Meier material, Noah was not told to build the ark by the creator of the universe, but by this king of wisdom who told him about the great flood. Now Noah's name, his real name, according to Meier information, was Noachadnezzar. And he was around 10 feet tall. He was commissioned again to build this ark by this Ishwish, who was one of the Hyperboreans. It's kind of how I got off on this tangent. So 100,000 years ago or so was when one of the great floods occurred. There have been many great floods on the earth. The ark landed about 100,000 years ago, and not on the peak of Mount Ararat, but about 30 meters away or so. If it would have landed on the peak, then none of the large 4-footed animals could have got down off of Mount Ararat. You know, your elephants can't climb up or down mountains. So, interesting information from the Meier contact reports about who Noah was, who these Hyperboreans were, and when this all occurred. I believe this Ishwish I was telling you about earlier was named Zebulon. The other, I got off on this tangent talking about the Hyperboreans, and before I forget, just to let you know, Hyperborea was located not that far from the North Pole, and it was actually the area we call Florida now. Florida was up at the North Pole before the pole shift. So that shifted the crust of the Earth. It shifted the Earth off its axis. And Hyperborea was a beautiful place. The climate was very moderate and very good. And that's where Eris the Barbarian attacked, Hyperborea. So, in any case, I wanted to talk about the other group of extraterrestrials that had a base here for a while. They were called the Hasters, and they were from a faraway galaxy located 483 million light years from Earth. And they were called the highly sophisticated inhabitants of the planet Hastur. And they're about 1,120 years ahead of us in terms of their development. They're very peaceful, they were very loving, and they existed in our dimension, which is really cool. Their home was in our same dimensions. The Hasters were brought here by the Plejaren in the Great Spacer Ship. And they built a station in the North Sea, which is north of Europe. And they also were given these vibration neutralizing devices that the Plejaren used to deal with our negative vibrations. We have such negative vibrations, the Plejaren can't be around us any more than half an hour, and they have to use these devices. Now, the Hasters are a little closer to us in terms of evolution, so they can be in our presence some 17 hours with these devices. Now, they have had contact with several people on the Earth, but these people have been sworn to silence about these contacts. So that was the other extraterrestrial group. For some reason, most all these extraterrestrials have left the Earth for one reason or another, which is kind of sad if you think about it. Now, so what has happened? I'm kind of digressing a bit into her history according to the Meier case. The Meier case says 130,000 years ago, the people from different star systems populated and built Atlantis, as well as the city of Mu. And before that, there was a man named Pelagon, who was the king of wisdom from the Plejaren star system, who came here about 150,000 years ago, developed a society even before the Atlanteans were here. However, before any of these happened, there were naturally developing Earth humans. About 9 to 12 million years ago, Homo sapiens sapiens started to develop here on the Earth. And we're all kind of evolved from a very small mammal named Adelobasialis cromptoni. Adelobasialis cromptoni is a species of an extinct genus of mammal from the late Triassic period, about 225 million years ago. The Adelobasialis cromptoni is thought to be the common ancestor of all modern animals, or a close relative. Now, 5 billion years ago, the Earth was formed into a solid mass. There was no instant creation of human beings or planets, as described in some of our religious writings. Human beings started to evolve on the Earth about 9 to 12 million years ago. And this life form that started this whole evolution was called Adelia spacialis Cromptoni. Again, this first fossil was discovered by a paleontologist named Adrian Hunt, who there's an interesting YouTube about that. So, according to FIGU Special Bulletin 32, consequently, primate beings, respectively primary beings, come into being everywhere, out of which, on one hand, through further evolution, the human species develop. So we come from primates, not from apes. Human beings and apes develop as separate beings. Human beings do not live a life based on instinct, but we have a consciousness, which was developed over millions of years. So originally, when our universe was created, there were something like 343 different skin colors for people. Here on the Earth remain remnants of many different human beings, races, groups of people. People that came here from the Cirrus regions, people who were on Mars, people who are on another world on our solar system that supported life called Melona. There have been extraterrestrials on the Earth, going back to Atlantis and Lemuria. Contact Report 9 talks about a man named Semyasa, who is described as one of the sub-leaders who came to the Earth with a kingdom of wisdom called Eris the Barbarian. This was during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. Semyasa is actually part of what's called the Nocodamian lineage. And Semyasa fathered Adam. So let me read to you a little bit about Semyasa. Semyasa is the highest leader of the sub-leaders. So there were something like 200 sub-leaders who came here with Eris the Barbarian. I believe Eris the Barbarian was from a place called Beta Centauri, which is hundreds of light years from Earth. In Arabic, it's called Hadar, which means to be settled, to be civilized, to be on the ground, to be present. It's very interesting that the ancient people on the Earth here call that star system Hadar, and they call it to be here, to be settled, to be on the ground. So we're on Earth what we call, or what they called, the Evas, which were the Earth human beings. And there were some of these who were rather human-like and very beautiful. So Semyasa, who was an extraterrestrial human, had sex with one of these women, and the son that came from that union was called Adam, which meant Earth human being. A similar breeding also produced a female. Well, the mixing of ET human and Earth human over several generations created these unbelievable giants that were 33 feet tall, higher even. I think some of them were as tall as 40 feet. Our Milky Way galaxy, I believe, has about 7.5 million solar systems which can support life. And I think about 2.6 million of these have humans on them. Some of them advanced, fairly advanced in these human societies. In these different worlds across our galaxy and our universe, there are people only 16 inches tall and people who are 40 feet tall. There are about 159 billion stars in our galaxy, and it's the yellow stars which give the correct kind of heat, light, and radiation to produce life, to have planets around them that produce light. One thing the Pleiadians tell us is that the Lyrians were their forefathers as well as our forefathers. And Thoth even talked to Billy about the Lyra system when Billy was much younger. And the Lyrans first settled our galaxy, and they came to the constellation of Lyra, which was in a different space-time configuration. Again, there are 7 dimensions in our material universe. Remember, there's both material aspects and immaterial or fine matter aspects to our universe. Our creation, our universe has 7 belts which counter-rotate against one another. The 4th belt is the physical universe, and that physical universe, the material belt, is divided into 7 different dimensions. I know that's confusing. So the people from Lyra Vega, there's a Lyra Vega in our dimension, but there's a Lyra Vega in another dimension, and this is the dimension that we're talking about. And they have a star Vega in that other dimension, just like we do. And Vega is the brightest star in the Lyra Vega system. It's one of the brightest stars in the night sky. And it forms part of what they call the famed summer triangle. And there are binary stars in that system. And these binary stars can be distorted by all these gravitational forces that goes on. Some of these stars are giants or supergiants, and mass flows from one star to another. And this occurs in these binary systems where there is a supergiant, where one of the stars is gigantic. We actually have a binary twin, but our twin star is smaller than the Earth. It can't be seen with the naked eye. It's what they call a red dwarf. It's very dim. It's about a light year from the Earth. It does affect us. It does affect the Oort cloud. It does exist. It isn't... well, let me just leave it at that, and I won't comment anymore on that right now. Binary systems orbit around what they call a barycenter, which is a common center between the 2 star systems. So, Contact Report 215 talks about supergiants, which are these giant stars. Let me read this a little bit to you. It's kind of interesting. But now I have a question. This is Billy speaking. But now I have a question regarding the entity or the giant star, as one always wants to say, which is called Betelgeuse. If I remember correctly, Ptah told me when he showed me the entity on my great journey in 1975 that this was about 620 times the diameter of our sun. In addition, there is another star called Al-Nitak, also such an entity or star, has a luminosity 19,000 times that of our sun. Is this right? For I explained this to someone who asked me about it. And if my information that I provide is wrong, then I would have to apologize to the man and rectify it. Betelgeuse, also designated Alpha Orionis, is the 9th brightest star in the night sky and the 2nd brightest star in the constellation of Orion. Our binary star is sometimes called the dark star, and its size is about 10 times smaller than our sun. and it has its own planets orbiting around it. The radius of the dark star to our solar system, our sun, is about a light year. And it circumnavigates, the two systems rotate around each other. I think it's 26 million years. It's quite a slow rotation. Now, Billy, his spirit form, his spiritual consciousness has an incredibly long history. His spirit form is 9.6 billion years old, and it's lived in other galaxies. And he's been on the earth, the people that we call Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad, Mendelssohn, Mozart, Galileo, to name but a few. Aristotle and Socrates, I think, were two of his former personalities. But he was also called Nocodamian. Let me read a little bit about Nocodamian. And this is in Contact Report 238. We're getting close on time here. The Lyran galaxy also went the eternal way of coming into being and passing away. It dissolved itself and turned into energy, out of which new stars and planets and a new galaxy came into being. This happened about 26 million years ago, which is why Nocodamian left the homeworlds with his people prior to that and settled on the worlds of Lyra and on Vega. However, shifted a little time from our time, only a fraction of a second. That they're in a different time plane, another dimension. So Nocodamian and his peoples therefore came very far out of the depths of the universe and settled themselves in the oldest space-shifted system area of the Milky Way galaxy. However, this was already Nocodamian's third exodus, because before he established or created his people on the planet Sadar, he came from other galaxies and planets that were older than the Lyran galaxy, which also passed the way of decay. And in Contact Report 248, Billy says, let's leave this subject and let's go on to the next question, which relates to where the original Lyrians came from and why they settled in the areas of Lyra and Vega. And Ptah said the first immigration goes back, and now Ptah's going back even farther, so they've come to multiple, they've had, it's a long history. It goes back 110 million years ago. And their place of origin was a planet named Kados in a distant galaxy known as the Nagaran galaxy at an average distance of about 6.3 billion light years. How big is the universe? It's beyond our imagination. 6.3 billion light years. Anyway, I think we kind of hit the wall here on time. I've definitely got time since it's my crazy period is coming to an end here during the day job, so I'm hopefully going to get back to regular activity with shows, and hopefully maybe, if not next week, the following week, start to get some guests again. Now, you've been listening to Ohio Exopod.